My name is General Catherine Kate Monroe, United States Army. And on the night my father stood in front of a crowded banquet hall in Richmond, Virginia, he raised his glass and said words I'll never forget. She's nothing but a mistake. I wish I could tell you different, but I can't. 55 years old, 2 stars on my shoulders, 3 decades of service, and still those words pierce me sharper than any enemy fire. I'd faced mortar blasts in Baghdad, buried soldiers younger than my own nieces, stood steady under commanders who doubted me. Yet it was the voice of my own father, gravelly with bourbon and pride, that cut deeper than all of it. The room froze. Forks stopped scraping against plates. A cousin cleared his throat but didn't speak. Somewhere near the buffet, a woman muttered, "For God's sake, Hal." Someone else gave a nervous chuckle, thinking maybe it was a joke. But it wasn't. He meant it. I stood there in my plain navy dress, clutching a paper cup of weak coffee that tasted like burned grounds and styrofoam. My father didn't lift me up that night. He pushed me down. And then, like a man proud of his correction, he puffed out his chest and slid an arm around Emma, the daughter of his new wife, Clara. Emma was 25, hair curled tight and high, sequined pink dress a size too small. That smirk of someone who believes the world is theirs for the taking. "This," Dad said, voice booming, "is my real daughter. This is the one who carries my name with pride." The crowd clapped politely. Some smiled at Emma like she was a homecoming queen. She giggled, swirling a glass of cheap rose, soaking in the praise. Me? I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. That's never been my way. The Army taught me discipline, but truth be told, I'd been practicing it long before I ever signed my name on enlistment papers back in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I just set my coffee down on a plastic table draped with a wrinkled cloth and told the bartender, a college kid sweating under his vest and bow tie, "Water's fine. Thanks." Then I walked out into the parking lot. The sun had just gone down, but the asphalt still radiated heat. Cicadas buzzed from the trees, a high electric hum that filled the silence Dad had left in me. I leaned against my old gray Ford Taurus, stared up at the violet sky, and breathed deep. The smell of cut grass drifted through the air, mixed with cigarette smoke from 2 vets swapping war stories near the door. They looked at me, then looked away. Folks never know what to do when a family shame spills out in public. Inside, the music picked up again. Someone had cranked George straight over the speakers, and I pictured Dad on the dance floor, stiff-legged beside Clara, while Emma soaked up compliments about her so-called Marine career at Quantico. The thing is, she wasn't lying. Emma was in uniform. She just didn't mention the rest. That she was admin. That her file had already crossed my desk last month, flagged for falsified travel claims. But that wasn't tonight's fight. Not yet. All I could hear over and over was my father's voice. "She's nothing but a mistake." I'm a woman who's written letters to grieving mothers. A woman who's stood watch in the desert night when the stars felt close enough to touch. A woman who earned every ribbon, every inch of respect the hard way, by showing up, by standing steady. And yet, in a hall filled with my neighbors, my cousins, the church ladies who used to pinch my cheeks, my father tried to drag me back down to the circumstances of my birth. The sting wasn't just the insult. It was the silence that followed. The way people's eyes slid away from mine. The way no one knew whether to clap or to look down at their plates. That silence was heavier than any insult. I thought about leaving. Driving straight up I-95, putting this whole night behind me. My uniform bag was still in the trunk, packed from the ceremony I'd presided over that morning at Fort Belvoir. Blue dress coat, polished shoes, ribbons I'd never bragged about, 2 stars that had taken half a lifetime to earn. And I thought about Mom, long gone now, who used to tell me, "Katie, you don't have to fight every fight. But the ones you do pick, fight them clean." So I stayed in that parking lot longer than I should have, cicadas buzzing louder than the music, the sting of Dad's words echoing in my ears. And that's where my story really begins. That night, I didn't sleep much. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and stale smoke that no amount of air freshener could hide. I lay flat on the stiff mattress, shoes still on, staring at the popcorn ceiling as semis rumbled down the highway outside. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. She's nothing but a mistake. You'd think a 2-star general would be tougher. And in most ways, I am. But small-town words, spoken by your own blood, can wound in ways the battlefield never could. Lying there, I thought back to where it all began. Tulsa, 1970s. A 2-bedroom duplex with aluminum siding that rattled in the wind. A swamp cooler that barely worked in July. Mom waiting tables at the diner off 61st Street. Coming home with sore feet and hair that smelled like fry grease. She was small, but she had a backbone made of steel. Dad wasn't much around. He had a construction business that never really stuck. Sometimes he showed up in a beat-up pickup. Sometimes he disappeared for weeks. When he did show, he could turn a good day sour with just a few words. He never once showed for a school play or a ball game. I learned early that if I wanted anything, I had to earn it myself. Paper routes in the freezing dawn, my fingers numb from folding newspapers. Summers mowing lawns until my back ached. Every dollar went into a coffee tin under Mom's sink, savings for a ticket out. At school, I wasn't the smartest kid, but I was steady. Teachers noticed. On one report card, Mrs. Dillard wrote, "Catherine follows through." I didn't think much of it then. Later, those words kept me going. Because at 13, one night at the dinner table, Dad looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll never be more than your mother." He thought it was an insult. I took it as the highest compliment. The summer after high school, when friends were heading to Oklahoma State or getting married too young, I had no ring, no scholarship, and no patience left. So one August afternoon, I walked into the recruiter's office. And that's when my real story began. I was 18 this summer. I raised my right hand at the recruiting office. The sergeant swore me, and under the buzzing fluorescent lights, paperwork stacked high on his desk, an American flag drooping behind him. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice flat from repeating the line too many times. I didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." He smirked. "You don't call me sir. Yet?" And that was it. I was in. The bus ride to basic was long and quiet, 20 of us kids from Oklahoma packed shoulder to shoulder, each pretending we weren't scared. I remember the smell of nervous sweat and leather duffel bags, the stale air conditioning rattling through the vents. Some whispered about girlfriends back home. One kid clutched a Bible like it was the only thing keeping him upright. When the bus doors swung open at Fort Jackson, the world changed. The drill sergeant stormed aboard like a thunderclap, voices sharp, commands ricocheting off the walls. "Get off my bus. Move, move, move." Feet stumbled down the steps. Bags thudded onto the gravel. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. I'd been invisible most of my life, but here, invisibility wasn't an option. Day by day, they broke us down and built us back up. Push-ups until your arms shook. Miles of running before the sun even thought about rising. The smell of gunpowder after the rifle range, the way your ears rang long after the shots stopped. There were moments I thought I couldn't take another step. But quitting wasn't an option. Mom's face floated in my mind each time I wanted to fall out of formation. Her voice, "Katie, you don't get to give up." Not in this family. I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't the strongest. But I was steady. I followed through. And in basic training, sometimes that's all that matters. By graduation day, when we stood tall in our pressed uniforms, boots polished like black mirrors, I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in a window. For the first time, I didn't see a mistake. I saw a soldier. Dad didn't come to graduation. He sent a card 2 weeks later, a generic hallmark with an eagle on the front. Inside, just 3 words written in his sloppy pen. "Don't mess up." That was Hal Monroe's way of saying congratulations. I tucked the card into my footlocker, not because it meant something, but because it reminded me who I wasn't living for. Over the years, the Army gave me more family than blood ever had. Sergeant Major Whitfield, who barked at me until I stopped slouching. Lieutenant Carver, who told me, "Monroe, you've got steel in you. Don't let anyone dull it." And then there were the ones who didn't make it home. faces that still live with me, young and frozen in memory. One of them was Private First Class Danny Lewis. 19 years old, freckles across his nose, always cracking jokes about home in Alabama. He died in my 3rd year in a convoy ambush outside Mosul. I wrote his mother a letter that night under the dim yellow light of a tent bulb. My hand shook as I wrote, "Your son served with honor." He was steady. He followed through. I thought about Mrs. Dillard's words on my report card years before. Catherine follows through. Maybe that's all I had to give the world, steadiness. But sometimes, steadiness is what keeps the line from breaking. Those years hardened me. But they also taught me that the world doesn't care about the insults your father threw across a dinner table or a banquet hall. The Army cares about one thing. Did you show up? Did you do the job? Still, at night, when the noise of the day faded, I'd hear Dad's voice echoing in the quiet. "You'll never be more than your mother. You're nothing but a mistake." And I'd wonder if that was why I drove myself harder than anyone else. Not to prove him wrong, but to prove myself right. By the time I hit 30, I was a captain, stationed in Germany. Long nights of drills in the rain, long weekends sipping bitter coffee in quiet cafes, writing reports no one outside the Army would ever read. That's when I realized something important. Dignity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's in the quiet consistency of showing up, even when no one claps. Years passed. I rose in rank, slow but steady, never flashy. And then came the day I pinned on my first star. The ceremony was simple, a flag backdrop, a handful of family invited, a speech that lasted maybe 6 minutes. Mom was gone by then, buried under Oklahoma sky. Dad wasn't there either, of course. I'd stopped sending him invitations. But Aunt June came. She stood in the back, tissue clutched tight in her hand, whispering through tears, "Your mama would be proud, Katie." That night, alone in my quarters, I poured a cup of burnt coffee and stared at the silver star gleaming on my shoulder. And I thought about the little girl folding newspapers in the freezing dawn, the teenager mowing lawns to save up for escape. I thought about how Dad had once told me, "You'll never amount to anything." And I whispered to myself, then why am I standing here? For a while, the memory of his voice dimmed. I buried myself in the rhythm of duty, deployments, ceremonies, paperwork stacked higher than coffee mugs, salutes crisp and sharp. But life has a way of circling back. And years later, on that night in Richmond, Virginia, when Dad lifted his glass and called me a mistake, all the miles I'd traveled, all the years I'd served, came rushing back to the same wound he'd carved decades earlier. I stood in that parking lot, cicadas buzzing, music leaking from the hall, thinking, you can take the girl out of Tulsa. You can cover her chest in ribbons and her shoulders in stars. But some scars don't fade, no matter how many miles you march. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Colonel Ortiz, Sam Ortiz, a man I'd mentored years back when he was just a green lieutenant fumbling through his first field exercise. He'd been like a younger brother ever since. His text was simple, heard what happened. Want me to call? I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, yes. Because sometimes, even generals need someone to steady them. And Sam's words that night would change everything. Sam picked up on the second ring. His voice was gravel, worn from years of command, but still warm. "General," he said, "didn't expect to hear from you this late." I leaned against the trunk of my Chevy, cicadas buzzing in the trees, the Legion Hall thumping faintly with George Strait. "I'm at my father's wedding, Sam," I said flat. He stood up in front of everyone, raised his glass, and called me a mistake. Then he put his arm around Ashley and told the whole room she was his real daughter. Silence stretched across the line. I could hear him breathing, steady and low. Then he chuckled, dry as desert sand. "Still the same Hal Monroe, huh?" "Worse," I muttered. "What are you thinking, ma'am?" I stared at the trunk, at the garment bag resting inside, dark and heavy in the glow of the parking lot lamp. "I've got my dress blues with me. 2 stars, full rack. Part of me wants to put them on and walk back in there. But another part of me, I hesitated. Another part of me thinks that's petty. Like I'd be doing it just to shove it in his face." Sam's tone shifted, calm and certain. Ma'am, you earned that uniform. Every stitch of it. Wearing it isn't petty. It's the truth. I closed my eyes. The night air clung to my skin, humid and heavy. I don't want to humiliate anybody, Sam. Then don't, he said simply. But don't let a lie stand either. Your old man can shout. Denise can brag. But that uniform? Nobody gave it to you. You bled for it. Let them see it. Let them know. We sat in silence a moment, just the buzz of insects filling the gap. Then Sam added, whatever you decide, ma'am, I know you'll do it clean. That word. Clean. Mom's word. I whispered it back to him. Clean. After we hung up, I didn't move right away. I stood there with my hands pressed against the cool metal of the trunk, staring at the garment bag like it was waiting on me. Finally, I unzipped it. The smell of wool and starch hit me like memory itself. Years of ceremonies, funerals, promotions, deployments. Sweat and polish, blood and pride, all stitched into navy blue. Piece by piece, I put it on. White shirt crisp, collar snug at my throat. Jacket fitted tight across my shoulders. Ribbons aligned row by row, a ledger of decades. 2 silver stars gleaming like twin anchors at the collar. Last, the shoes, black mirrors catching the glow of the streetlights. I checked myself in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back wasn't Hal Monroe's mistake. She wasn't the little girl folding newspapers at dawn, or the teenager running from home. She was Major General Kate Monroe, United States Army. I squared my shoulders, straightened my cover, and whispered to myself, you didn't come here to win a scene. You came here to stand in the truth. With that, I shut the trunk and walked back toward the hall. Every step across that gravel lot was heavy, but steady. Clean. Inside, the Legion Hall was still buzzing. The DJ had switched to a fiddle tune, cousins were two-stepping on scuffed linoleum, and the buffet line smelled of pulled pork and coleslaw. But the second I pushed open the door, the air shifted. The blast of air conditioning hit me, along with the faint squeal of the fiddle. And then silence. Not a hushed silence. The kind that presses against your chest. I walked in, heels clicking against the floor, the 2 stars on my shoulders catching every fluorescent light. Heads turned. Forks froze midair. Someone muttered, "Good Lord." Another whispered, "That's 2 stars, isn't it?" At the head table, Dad froze. Denise's hand looped through his arm. His smile faltered, then stiffened. Ashley was mid-laugh when she saw me. At first her eyes caught on the medals, the cut of the jacket. Then her gaze lifted to my face. Color drained. She staggered back a step, her wine glass trembling in her hand. "Oh my God," she stammered, voice cracking loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's my general." The words rang through the hall like a bell. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I walked toward the front, every step measured, every breath steady. When I reached the head table, I turned to face the room. "I came tonight to wish my father a good life," I said evenly, voice calm, carrying without strain. "I didn't come for speeches. And I didn't come for insults. I am who I am. And I worked for it." Nobody breathed. Even the ice machine behind the bar seemed to go quiet. I turned slightly toward Ashley, who stood frozen, her cheeks pale. "Ashley will handle any Marine business at the office," I said. "Not here." Her lips parted, but no words came. She just nodded, quick and shaky. Then I raised my glass of water. "To making things right when we can." I took a slow sip, set it down, and waited. It was Aunt June who broke the silence first. "Kate, honey," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. And then she started clapping. One by one, others joined. Hesitant at first, then stronger. A Vietnam vet in the back straightened in his chair and snapped a sharp salute. A woman from church dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Even the bartender, barely out of college, stood taller behind the counter. Dad didn't clap. His jaw was tight, his eyes narrowed. Denise forced a smile, stiff and brittle. But it didn't matter. The truth was standing in front of everyone, and there was no walking it back. I didn't linger. I wasn't there to gloat. I stepped away from the head table, walked through the room as the applause swelled, and headed for the door. Each handshake, Each nod, each whispered, "Thank you, General," was more than enough. Outside, the cicadas still buzzed. The summer night was still heavy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something else too. Release. Clean. The applause was still echoing in my chest as I stepped into the night. The summer air was thick, cicadas screaming from the trees, honeysuckles sweet on the breeze. I leaned against my Chevy Malibu, the blue uniform still hugging my shoulders like armor. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't planned any of it. But somehow, standing in that hall calm, clean, steady, had felt less like choice and more like necessity. One by one, guests trickled outside. It was like they needed air after what they'd just seen. The first was a Vietnam vet in a ball cap, gait stiff with old wounds. He stopped in front of me, straightened as best he could, and stuck out his hand. "Proud of you, ma'am," he said, voice gravel but steady. "We needed someone like you back then." I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you. And thank you for your service." He nodded once, sharp, and limped off into the dark. Next came a woman I barely remembered from church potlucks years ago. She pressed my hand between hers, tears brimming in her eyes. "Your mama would be so proud, Kate." Before I could answer, she turned away, dabbing at her cheeks. And then Ashley. She lingered near the doorway at first, fidgeting with her clutch, her painted nails tapping nervously against the sequins. Finally, she stepped toward me, her heels clicking unevenly on the asphalt. Her voice was small, shaky, nothing like the brash tone she'd carried inside. "I didn't know," she whispered. I didn't realize. I studied her face. 26 years old, too much blush, wine still on her breath. A kid, really. "You don't have to know everything yet," I said evenly. "But you do need to be honest." Her eyes widened, glistening in the glow of the parking lot lamp. "We'll talk at Quantico," I continued. "Bring your receipts. Bring the truth. You'll be fine if you're honest." She swallowed hard, nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." Then she hurried off into the night, head bowed, heels wobbling against the gravel. Denise followed soon after, lips tight, eyes flashing. She didn't speak to me, just walked past, perfume sharp in the humid air, shoes clicking like gunfire. The lot emptied until it was just me and the hum of the streetlights. I sat behind the wheel, uniform still sharp, hands resting on the steering wheel. My phone buzzed with a new voicemail. "Dad." I didn't listen right away. When I finally pressed play, his voice spilled through the speaker, rough, unsteady. "Kate, I went too far. Shouldn't have said it. I don't know how to fix it." Then a pause, and he hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there a long while, staring through the windshield at the dark outline of the trees. For once, there was no anger, no fire in my chest. Just a steady kind of release. The next morning at Quantico, the rhythm returned. I walked into my office, saluted, sat behind the stack of files waiting for me. Ashley's memo was right there, on top of the pile, exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up, read it line by line, and signed it by the book. No cruelty, no favoritism, just the truth. That's what the Army demands. Word about the wedding spread fast, Marines talk. Stories slip through chow lines and smoke pits quicker than email ever could. But I didn't feed it. I showed up the same as always. Inspections, briefings, young officers fumbling through their first presentations. My job wasn't spectacle. It was steadiness. Leadership isn't noise. It's rhythm. And I kept the rhythm steady. That weekend, I drove out to the cemetery where Mom was buried. The grass was trimmed neat, flags fluttering in the late morning breeze. I stood there in full uniform, hands clasped behind my back, boots planted on the earth she'd raised me from. Her stone was simple. Just her name, her years, and the words. She followed through. I smiled, throat tight. "It's done, Mama," I said softly. He said his piece, and I said mine. But I said it clean. The wind stirred then, carrying the faint sweetness of honeysuckle across the rows of stones. I stayed until the sun rose high, warming the marble, casting sharp shadows across the ground. Then I turned, climbed back into my Chevy, and drove home. Windows down. Radio low. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt something close to peace. Months passed. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm. Quantico mornings that began before dawn, staff meetings that dragged too long, nights where paperwork stacked higher than my coffee mug. Nobody in uniform mentioned the wedding. Not directly, but I could feel the way the story had traveled, whispered from chow lines to smoke pits. Marines are a quiet network. They don't gossip so much as carry tales. Word finds its way faster than email. Still, at work, they treated me exactly the same as before. Good morning, ma'am. Crisp salutes. Steady respect. The kind that comes from years, not headlines. And that was enough. Then came the change of command ceremony. One of our regiments was cycling leadership, and as base commander, it was my duty to preside. The day was cool, early autumn, flags snapping in the breeze. Brass polished until it gleamed like mirrors. Families filled the folding chairs on the parade deck, kids fidgeting in their Sunday best, cameras ready. The Marine band played sharp, precise. Notes carried across the field like a clean cut of steel. I stood at the podium, blue dress uniform perfect, ribbons lined like a ledger of years lived hard. I said the usual words, recognition for the outgoing commander, welcome for the incoming. Nothing flowery, just truth. Marines don't need speeches. They need steadiness. Afterward, I stepped down to greet families. A line formed. Handshakes, photographs, polite thank yous. And there, near the back, I saw him. Dad. Sports coat a size too big. Tie crooked. Hair thinner than I remembered. He hadn't brought Denise. He hadn't brought Ashley. He stood alone. Hands shoved deep into his pockets, waiting his turn like any other guest. When he reached me, he didn't smirk. He didn't puff his chest. He didn't make a joke to cover his nerves. He just stuck out his hand. And loud enough for everyone around to hear, he said, "My daughter, General Catherine Avery. Not bastard. Not nothing. My daughter." The words landed plain, almost awkward. But they were real. And they settled deeper than any insult ever had. For a second, the world felt still. Just me, my father, and a correction that had been 50 years in the making. Aunt June was there too, standing off to the side. Tears welled in her eyes. She rushed forward, hugged us both, and whispered, "About time, Hal. About time." I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just nodded, shook his hand, and said, "Thank you." He stepped aside then, letting the next family through. No reconciliation storybook ending. No warm embrace. Just a small, steady correction spoken in public. And that was enough. That evening, I drove home with the windows down, 95 humming beneath my tires. A Whataburger cup rattled in the console, the taste of sweet tea lingering. The sun dipped low, painting the highway orange and gold. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something like peace. Here's what I learned. Blood isn't about who shouts the loudest at a wedding toast. Blood is about who shows up, even late, even clumsy, but honest. And dignity? It doesn't need a crowd. But sometimes a crowd needs to see dignity, so they'll remember it when it's their turn.